this may not happen. I know from my time in government that in the run-up to the autumn statement and a run-up to the budget, all sorts of speculation goes out into the public domain. And sometimes, you know, some stuff is put out there so that when the real stuff... exactly. And also when the real stuff comes out, then you're almost kind of, you know, you don't see it coming. So it just maybe they're just flying a kite on this. It may well be this is not going to happen in any event. But I completely agree with Craig and John. This would be I mean, as somebody who's run small businesses all her life, this would be a jobs tax. This would make businesses stop and think about, one, you know, pay increases. Because remember, there's a pay increase coming anyway because of the increase in living wage, which is absolutely right. But a lot of employers pay above that. And they might say, well, I'd rather not pay that extra above the living wage because I'm now going to have to pay more national insurance. There's also talk that they might be looking at national insurance for employer pension contributions. And again, that's disturbing because if an employer is making a pension contribution, which is helping for the future for that particular employee, and we start to put in national insurance on that, that's going to, again, stop employers from making those contributions. There's all sorts of question marks about this particular tax, and I just don't think it's going to be good for small businesses. On
the pension side, I think most of the advice that's come in has pushed them back from that. But was a kite flown by some organisations,
You will know, though, you know, in your time as Shadow Chancellor, you've got to make this stuff add up in some ways, right? And if you look at the books now, it's very difficult. You know, you've got these huge cuts to public services that have been penciled in by the last government. You've got...
It's a toxic inheritance.
What do you do?
Yeah, it's a toxic inheritance. I think they're moving the right way with regard to investment. Invest. They're going to... It looks as though they will change the fiscal rule. It looks as though they're going to adopt the fiscal rule that I brought in 2019, public sector net value, net worth, which will give them the opportunity to do that. But on the revenue side...
Can I give you credit for that one then?
I doubt it. But it doesn't matter. The issue then is on the revenue side, the taxation. They have got to bite the bullet. But there's a whole range of mechanisms which are relatively minor reforms, but will add up cumulatively to quite the money that they need. The IFS is talking about 20 billion, something like that. I don't think it's that difficult to do, but they did sort of tie their hands behind their back a bit, particularly with regard to issues like income tax for the richer people, the higher earners.
Yeah, and this is the issue. I mean, there is a real issue about how do you raise revenue and how do you deal with public sector cuts. But the challenge that Labour have is they made such a big virtue of this, and it felt like they had a strategy for the general election and to win, and now they have a strategy in terms of dealing with the public finances. And when you do that, it's the trust issue that creeps in, and that's where I think they do have a challenge. Look, I can understand when we were saying to them, you are going to raise taxes, they should have probably been more honest and said, look, we will look at the books as and when we inherit them, and we're not ruling anything out, and it may well be we're going to have to take some tough decisions. But they didn't say that. They made some quite specific promises over and over again in the run-up to the election.
I think both parties were reticent before the election of being completely straight about how bad it was. And in terms of... I think he's got the right principle where he's saying the heaviest burden should fall on the broadest shoulders. So that does mean... That's very
much a Conservative phrase.
Well,
that's what people say every year.
By the way, that was a coalition phrase in Cabinet that I was part of that.
What isn't Conservative is actually making sure the big corporations pay and actually the wealthiest pay as well.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Honesty during an election campaign, wouldn't that be a thing?
That would be great.
You're watching The Politics Hub coming up. The former Foreign Secretary David Cameron reveals that the last government planned sanctions against 2 Israeli ministers. Should the Labour government implement that plan? We'll hear from the man who was Lord Cameron's deputy in the Foreign Office, Andrew Mitchell.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. made by people who dare to challenge. Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you.
Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. The government today announced a new set of sanctions against organisations accused of human rights abuses against Palestinian communities in the West Bank. It came after the former Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, revealed that the last government had been preparing to sanction 2 Israeli ministers. And in the Commons today, the government came under pressure from its own MPs who believe that Israel is in breach of international law. Here's what the Foreign Office Minister, Annalise Dodds, told MPs.
We are deeply concerned about the continuing violence. We must avoid this conflict spiralling further out of control and into a wider regional war, which is in no one's interest. The UK was the first G7 nation to call for an immediate ceasefire between Lebanese Hezbollah and Israel, and for the implementation of a political plan that will enable civilians on both sides to return to their homes.
Well, our political correspondent Ali Fortescue is here with us. Ali, just explain the story to us.
So I'll start with this morning. David Cameron basically revealed that he was considering sanctions against 2 Israeli ministers, a finance minister and the national security minister. He said he was held back in the spring because it was the election. Politically, it wasn't the right moment. Since then, we've had an announcement from the Foreign Office that there will be sanctions. It's not quite the same thing. It feels like a bit of a coincidence. They're saying it's not a knee-jerk reaction, which I think is probably fair. They'd have to come up with it quite quickly if it was a knee-jerk reaction to David Cameron. But they have announced sanctions. This is really to tackle settler violence. So 3 illegal settler outposts and 4 organisations that support illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank is where the sanctions will be against. Lamy said that he made the decision after going to the West Bank himself and seeing the rise in settler violence, 1,500 attacks in the last year, according to the UN. He said, "We had a very lively debate, though, in the House of Commons today after an urgent question, and there are plenty of people who want the government to go further, not least the Lib Dems. They say that they should be sanctioning those 2 ministers that David Cameron talked about. And Andy McDonald, who asked this urgent question, Labour MP, also said they should go further, particularly on arms sales, which we've, of course, discussed before. So strong feelings on all sides. I should say we heard 2 from Richard Tice, a former leader of Reform, who said the West are failing to negotiate a return of the hostages. So obviously there are many views on this, but there is clearly an appetite from some for the government to go further, but there have been new sanctions today.
Ali, thank you very much indeed. Ali Fortescue explaining that to us. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Andrew Mitchell. Thank you very much for being on the programme this evening. I just want to talk to you about sanctions. In an interview today, David Cameron said that when he was Foreign Secretary, the government at the time was effectively poised to sanction 2 Israeli ministers. I mean, you were obviously part of the government at the time. Is that how you remember it?
Yes, it is. We don't generally give the names of people who are being sanctioned or who are under consideration for sanctioning. But David is perfectly correct in saying that when we were coming out of government, there were a number of people, including those two, who were being considered for sanctioning.
I mean, it feels like quite a big step to sanction members of another country's government.
Well, these are two individuals, very hard over, deliberately inciting attacks on aid convoys, behaving in an insightful way as well, inciting people on the West Bank amongst the settler community. The evidence is there for all to see, but there's a process by which these issues are addressed. And we sanctioned something like 8 of those who were part of the settler community for acts which we thought were completely beyond the pale. And I'm quite certain the current government also will sanction those where they think it's the right thing to do.
So how close were you to sanctioning these 2 individuals then?
Well, there's a process which goes on. I can't really comment on the process, but the process which goes on, because it's a highly legal requirement to get it right, there's a process that goes on and it takes as long as that process requires.
So are you disappointed that this current Labour government don't seem to be considering those sanctions or seem to have dropped the process?
Well, I don't know that they have, but I certainly think that they should be following up with vigour all the particular cases that the last government put forward.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because you don't agree with the arms embargo that the Labour government has imposed, partial arms embargo, I should say, on Israel, but you think they should go further on the sanctions. So I'm just trying to get my head around that.
Well, that's because, it's a rather odd thing to do, to impose an arms embargo, when British militia, British military personnel, British weaponry is being used to defend Israel from attacks by Iran. So at the same time, to be imposing an arms embargo feels a very odd thing to be doing. And also remember that the arms embargo doesn't actually match the areas of IHL, which were of international and humanitarian law-breaking, which were identified by the Labour government. So I just think it's a very odd thing to do, to impose an arms embargo when we are assisting Israel exercise their right of self-defence against huge numbers of missile and rocket attacks from Iran.
Can I talk to you about Lebanon?
Yes.
Because we have, of course, seen the Israelis launching these airstrikes on Lebanon, people dying, children dying because of the pager attacks as well. Are you comfortable with the Israeli attacks on Lebanon?
Well, I do think that Israel absolutely has the right of self-defence. And if you think about it, the British government, if a prescribed terrorist group was launching rockets into our country over the border, driving 60,000 people south because they can't live in their homes, destroying their schools, the idea that Britain would impose a ceasefire on itself is completely ridiculous.
At the same time, though,
we would stop the source of the attack.
Look,
and that's why Israel does have a right of self-defence.
Look, Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation, right? It's a prescribed terrorist organisation. And as you say, it is clear that Israel has a right to self-defence. These are the things that I don't think people would argue with. But there is still a debate to be had about whether the current Israeli strikes on Lebanon are something that we are comfortable with. Are you personally comfortable with them?
I'm absolutely comfortable with the right of self-defence.
I'm asking about the current...
Yes.
The current the airstrikes that they're doing and the assaults that they're doing on Lebanon. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, I'm very unhappy about the treatment of the United Nations peacekeeping soldiers. I was myself a UN peacekeeping soldier in the distant past, and it's absolutely essential that all combatants respect the United Nations forces when they're deployed in the way that UNIFIL is. But the answer to your question lies in the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which, although very dated, had the key ingredients for peace, which was Hezbollah should get back behind the Litani River, stop rocketing northern Israel, and actually also lay down their arms and stop being a cancer in Lebanese society, supported and armed and funded by a foreign power, Iran.
You mentioned there the UN peacekeepers, and of course on Monday you saw various nations, the UK, Italy, France, Germany, release this joint statement saying they condemn Israel for the repeated attacks on UN peacekeepers. Are you worried that, given that Israel has banned the head of the UN from Israel as well, that they are undermining the UN?
Well, I agree that under no circumstances should UN peacekeepers be attacked by either side for the reasons that I've said. They're there. The clue is in the title. They are peacekeepers. But equally, you know, it ought to be possible on the ground for relationships between the combatants and the UN, this has always been the case in the past, to agree on a way of working which would not put them in peril. So, but I am very disturbed at the attacks on UN peacekeepers, which are quite wrong, and it's essential that the Israeli Defence Force and the UN diffuse that and stop it happening.
There are, of course, so many important issues on your brief with what's happening in the Middle East and elsewhere as well, of course. But I did just want to ask you, just finally, one domestic question, if I may, because there has been a bit of a row over speculation that Labour is about to put up employers' national insurance contributions in the budget. Do you think that would be a breach of the manifesto?
Well, it certainly looks like it. And, you know, we want to see the investment conference yesterday succeed in generating billions of pounds of investment. But if you tax jobs, which is what the proposal appears to be, that is not going to be good for employment, it's not going to be good for growth, and it goes entirely against the direction that the government set out yesterday on their investment conference.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right, let's bring in Saida and John, shall we? Saida, what do you make of Andrew Mitchell's interview there?
I think that it's interesting that David Cameron spoke about the sanctioning of Ben Gvir and Smotrich this morning, the two ministers, who, by the way, the UK government disengaged with some time ago. So the Foreign Secretary, I think at the time it was James Cleverly, said he wouldn't meet with them. And their rhetoric, their behaviour, their incitement to violence, actually handing out arms to settler communities is well documented. And these individuals should have been sanctioned a long time ago. And I can understand why, because of the general election, that was put off. It's surprising, though. I actually am convinced that the response from Labour was linked to that interview this morning. I think all of this work in relation to sanctioning has been done within the Foreign Office. It was only a question of announcing it. But I'm really disappointed that Labour did not go further and did not go as far as what David Cameron was saying this morning, which is it shouldn't just be a sign of some individuals, some small institutions, some organisations. It should have been these two big figures who have been essential and key to the violence and the hatred. At one point, these were individuals that were actually on the border between Israel and Palestine and effectively supporting people from stopping aid, food getting in to civilians. So I cannot understand why Labour did not take the decision to sanction these individuals. But I think this is the start. I also think we need to look at charities in the United Kingdom who are supporting settlement building and settler communities and sending funds. I think the Charities Commission need to be incredibly careful that UK money is not going into supporting illegal settlements and that individuals in the UK are not involved with that. But I just feel that Labour have been incredibly timid, whether it was just the 30 arms, the 30 different licences that they stopped from 300, or whether it's this quite timid approach to sanctions. It's tiny, tiny, tiny steps in a war that has been horrific. John?
I know Labour has only been in power for, 12 weeks now, but the strength of feeling in the House of Commons today on the Labour side was so strong. Every second Labour MP was raising the issue of sanctions and arms sales, and ending arms sales completely. And we're just trying to say to our own front bench, look, we've had 12 months of representations to Netanyahu, we've had 12 months of diplomacy, and Netanyahu and his cabinet ignore it. Last night, I watched those scenes of the bombing of the tents in the hospital grounds. We saw people being burnt alive. And I just feel we've got to move forward now. And sanctions is just one mechanism where we can demonstrate to the Israeli government that we're serious about this. We will not tolerate this behaviour. And I think if we do it, I think others will follow suit. And that might put enough pressure on to maybe urge them towards a ceasefire discussion.
And this is so much broader now than just what's going on in Gaza. I think the way in which Netanyahu has attacked the United Nations Secretary General, the whole kind of international rules-based framework, the way in which there's now direct attacks upon UN peacekeepers, we are actually starting to see the rules-based order, the mechanisms, the institutions that were rightly built after the Second Second World War to ensure that there was a space where all the world could get together and mechanisms could work. I'm genuinely concerned about the rhetoric that's coming out about the UN. It started with UNRWA and it's now ended with, direct attacks upon UN peacekeepers. And I think if for no other reason, the United Kingdom needs to take a position. We are a permanent member of the Security Council. We are some of the biggest funders to these institutions like the ICC and others. If there is one thing we stand for, it is to protect those international institutions and a rules-based order which the whole world desperately needs.
I can see you nodding along there as well. Thank you both very much indeed. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Who was behind the summer riots? A Sky News investigation reveals the global network which fueled the unrest. Hello, welcome back. Now, Sky News has been investigating who was fuelling the UK riots that followed the Southport stabbings, where several children were killed. Our findings reveal that only 6 of the most influential accounts posting about the violence were based in the UK, with many more from overseas. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this special report.
The reaction to the murder of 3 little girls in Southport rapidly descended into full-scale riots across the country. This apparently homegrown response came with international provocation. Although there have been limited reports about foreign involvement in the riots, Sky News has, for the first time, uncovered and mapped the networks on Telegram, the encrypted messaging app where the flames were fanned and the riots were organised. We've been working with Pros, an open-source intelligence startup which has a deep penetration of far-right and conspiracist networks on Telegram, to find out who is behind the messaging.
One interesting thing we can see here, especially considering this is the first day, is that the source of most of the information that people are talking about on Telegram isn't British English language communities.
And this is a map of all those accounts for the 2 weeks after the Southport murders. The red is UK-based extreme right-wing or conspiracist accounts, and you can see it's dwarfed by other sources. Purple for non-UK-based English accounts, but also Germany in orange, along with French and Spanish at the top of the chart. The most widely shared content on Telegram during the initial 3 days of the unrest was primarily authored by non-domestic accounts from the USA and Europe. They played a significant role in shaping the UK's online discourse, amplifying far-right narratives and disinformation. Of the top 20 most important sources in those 2 weeks after the attacks in Southport, only 6 were based in the UK. The rest were abroad. This post from a right-wing Spanish politician and member of the European Parliament falsely said the attacker was a Muslim immigrant. We tried to contact the account but received no reply. Silvano Trotta was one of the other most influential users, ripping an article from the Daily Mail and posting his own comment, falsely peddling the name Ali al-Shakati. We asked the people behind those accounts for comment, and one of them agreed. Silvano Trotta is a telecoms entrepreneur based in Strasbourg, France, on the border with Germany.
You did this Telegram post which was viewed, hundreds of thousands of times, giving a false name. Why did you put that post out there?
It's always difficult. Who doesn't make mistakes? But all the same, he's still an immigrant, even if he was born in Wales, even if he's 17 years old.
We asked other accounts for comment, but didn't receive a reply. Telegram spokesperson Remy Vaughan told us, Telegram is not a place to spread violent content. Moderators removed UK groups and channels calling for violence when they were discovered in August. To dissuade criminal misuse of Telegram, IP addresses and phone numbers of criminals who violate our rules can be disclosed to the authorities in response to valid legal requests. We are ready to cooperate with the UK government through the appropriate channels. In Southport, the memorials to the 3 murdered girls are still in place. One of the tragedies of the riots is that they eclipsed the grief the town felt and still feels. But experts have warned that the riots and the online reaction were not a one-off, but a playbook that could be used again. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Southport.
I have to say I found that report absolutely fascinating. Let's talk to Saeed and John, shall we? I guess it just shows the global nature of this disinformation.
Yeah, that's a superb piece of investigative journalism. Tom Cheshire deserves a lot of thanks for what he's done there, exposing it, basically. The classic analysis of fascism, that's what this is, we have to be straight about that, is you have at the top a few demagogues, narcissistic demagogues, and we've got those. Then below that you do have a hardened core of fascists, Nazis, whatever you want to call them. And then below that is large numbers of disgruntled people who are upset in their lives, and they're the tinder that the fascists set alight. And what we learned in the 30s was that the fascists used radio, but cinema as much as possible, adept at using communication systems. What we're seeing here is that a new phenomenon, which is, yes, this same structure, but that organised fascism is there, but it's almost on a global scale now, working together. But they're trained and they're experienced, and they're setting a light to all those people who may be having a hard time, disillusioned with life, that sort of thing. And that's where governments come in. I think journalism has a really important role today, as we've just seen, exposing what's going on, demonstrating these networks exist, how they are, how we can tackle those networks with law in many instances, but by exposing them, how we can also ensure that we mobilise against them and people understand what we're dealing with. These weren't naive riots, these were organised now. Of course, what you have to do is make sure you're making sure that tinder doesn't exist, and that means governments operating on the issues that those people have lost confidence in society on.
It's quite interesting, the sort of pyramid that you describe. Saeed, you're in many ways the perfect person to talk to you about this issue because you've just written a book recently, looking at some of these issues themselves.
In fact, I was writing the book, and then the riots happened, and what I've said, numerous times now is that it's easy to blame the young men, and they were predominantly young men or men who were on the streets angry and throwing bricks at the police and trying to burn down buildings, and those were serious offences that were committed, and most of them have now been, charged and convicted and as serving time. But they were just the tip, and everything that had happened up to that point over a period of many, many years, certainly in this country, I've tracked it for nearly 15 years, where the poisoning of the public discourse around Muslims and migrants and refugees has been very deliberate, that it's been led by some of the most powerful people in this country and around the world, that it is an organised network, and that they wait for something to happen tragically, and on this occasion it was some young girls, families who lost their children, and they use those moments as a way of igniting what John said, the kind of, disgruntled. And again, brilliant piece of journalism, and we have such a big responsibility. But that starts with us in Parliament calling out those of our colleagues who use this kind of language at the dispatch box, who use this kind of language in speeches, who use this kind of language in newspaper articles where they demonise and stigmatise and stereotype communities. And that drip poisoning is what eventually, this green lighting by the respectable, is what effectively allows people on the street to say, well, this is fine, we can behave like this. And eventually it resulted in cars being stopped and people being asked what nationality they were, looking at the colour of their skin, their background, to see whether or not they should be attacked or lynched. So a brilliant piece of journalism, but also makes you realise just how far and wide this problem of far-right extremism stretches.
And how effective they've been using this new media. And we really need to look at the media companies that are allowing this to operate in that way, unchallenged largely.
Thanks both very much. Indeed, a really important debate to have. Thank you. Still to come on the Politics Hub. As one MP says that Westminster needs to wean itself off social media, just interesting given what we were just talking about, we look back at a more innocent time, the golden age of the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Hello, coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, we'll have the latest on that breaking news as Thomas Tuchel agrees to become the next England manager. The former Bayern Munich boss has apparently already signed the deal. Also coming up, an investigation into the far-right global network that fueled the summer riots. And controversy hits this year's World Conker Championships. We'll be hearing from one of the competition's judges. All that and much more to come at 8.
Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast equivalent of a Pro Plus caffeine tablet that tells you everything about what you need to know the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me in the Zoom call is Sam Coates of Sky News.
The front runner among the members, Kenny Badenoch, did much worse than I was expecting. Now, traditionally and historically, MPs want to rush to back early the front runner candidate because it helps your chances of getting a job further down the track. It's good to be seen to be there early with the person who's going to win. And the fact that even though she was topping a lot of the surveys, that she didn't get more than 6 votes behind Robert Jenrick is very ominous for her campaign.
This issue had sort of bubbled away a bit last week. It was always going to come back this week because of the vote, but it was rather blown up again on Thursday due to a very prominent Labour Party commentator wading in on it and saying that Rachel Reeves might need an escape route. Now, that person was Ed Balls, who used possibly one of the most prominent Labour figures to speak about Treasury matters.
Oh my God.
What happened?
Sorry, I've got my cat is fighting another cat through the window. I'm going to have to stop it.
There's a cat fight.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues.
the public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it. Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Hello, welcome back. Now, is social media, specifically X or Twitter, as I still call it, responsible for a toxic atmosphere in Westminster and beyond? Well, that's the view of the Labour MP Josh Simons, who, of course, is a regular presence on this show. He's told The Guardian, "I think that it's totally and completely wrong and harmful to British democracy that the Westminster bubble gets to know each other through a ranking model designed by a man who spent his life campaigning for Donald Trump." But was X or Twitter always that bad? Well, we thought we would go in search of the golden years of social media to see if it was always so grim. And we discovered this tweet, which is possibly my favourite tweet of all time. This is Grant Shapps, all the way back in March 2008. "Today, I've been relaxing with the family, and during the afternoon, we popped over to the Howard Centre, but didn't buy anything." I just love everything about that tweet. I don't actually know what the Howard Centre is, but I love the fact you didn't buy anything. There was a couple of other ones as well. Let's have a quick look at some more. This is Sadiq Khan. So we saw people trying to get up to grips with the new tech. The same year, 2008, this is Sadiq Khan, now Mayor of London, setting up social marketing accounts. So at least he's honest, saying that it's all about marketing. I love it. And this one is David Cameron. This is 2012, so a little bit later. David Cameron, "I'm starting conference with this new Twitter feed about my role as Conservative leader. I promise there won't be too many tweets." Now, we remember, of course, about him saying that too many tweets might make a word that I can't possibly say on this programme. But perhaps good advice, I'll be honest, as well. Across the pond, this is President Obama. "Hello, Twitter, it's Barack." Really? I love all the exclamation marks as well. 6 years in, they're finally giving me my own account. I love the enthusiasm there. And, of course, those in the political limelight have made a couple of slip-ups on Twitter as well. Easily done. This is Donald Trump. "Despite the constant negative press covfefe?" I'm not even sure how to say, but I remember there was a whole, kind of roll afterwards about what on earth he was talking about. Covfefe. Sounds it's a very kind of un-Trumpian thing to say. And then finally, here we go. We can't talk about politicians using X.
Ed Balls Day.
You guessed it.
Yes, yeah.
You guessed it. Ed Balls, who just tweeted Ed Balls. This was back in 2011, but of course it sparked many memes, and some people even celebrate Ed Balls Day. There he is, 10 long years. He really lent into it. How was early Twitter for you guys?
In the early days, I can remember the main criticism is if you got an apostrophe wrong or something like that, wasn't it? It was all very gentle and quite sweet, actually. These days, nightmare, isn't it? Vitriolic, really vile at times. But you need to use it to just get information out there and comment out there. So it's still a valuable tool, but it has been degraded. And also, when you make a complaint to Twitter about someone who is being threatening or whatever, they never take action, to be honest.
It's true. Well, how about you?
Well,
how was early Twitter?
It used to be a wordy version of Instagram, didn't you? You put nice pictures up and nice posts up. But I think
I'd always get the pictures wrong. That was the
But I think for me, I was now, the last year and a half is an absolute cesspit. And what's interesting is most of the accounts don't have a name. Most of them don't have a bio. Most of them have got less than 1,000 followers. And I genuinely think these are bot farms. I do think this is a bit like the Ashley Madison of kind of the Twitter world, where all these people think that we're engaging with real people, but they're
not.
Don't exist.
We're out of time. I could talk a lot longer, but thanks very much for being on the Politics Hub tonight. Great to see you both. Thank you.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.